Hello, and welcome to the Swiss Money Secrets podcast, presented to you by WHVP. WHVP is a company that has been helping Americans move assets outside of the US for over 30 years. In this podcast, the listeners can expect to hear on subjects pertaining to offshore investment and investing outside of the US markets and the US dollar. Now, let's get into it. All right, so welcome to the Swiss Money Secrets podcast. Today, our listeners, we are really fortunate, Jamie and I and the WHVP team, to have Jacqueline Rüsch from Privileged Ventures here with us to talk about venture capital and what the scene in Switzerland looks like and maybe how it differs a bit from the US markets and how maybe it differs from private equity. But before we get into that, we're going to discuss a little bit of Swiss news, of, I guess, history-making news for the Swiss rugby team. So as many of the listeners may know or may not know, I play with the Swiss national rugby team, and we just finished our tour around Europe in the Trophy Championship tournament with 4 consecutive wins. So we won every game this year, which is cool. And because of that, we are now at the highest rank that Swiss rugby has ever been in the history of Swiss rugby in the world rankings, which is number 27. So small local news, nothing that really makes sense nothing that
we are very proud.
Yeah, well, it's been fun, and I really have to say, like, it wouldn't be possible to have, especially with Swiss rugby, it's all amateur, it's not professional. If we didn't have the support from this company, allowing, like, the support that you guys have given me to be able to go be a part of that has been really, really cool. So thank you, and you guys also get to etch your name in history of support. So.
Well, I'm not sure if we support enough to get our names etched in history for that, but no, it's amazing what you accomplish besides work. I mean, we all see how much you do for our clients, how much you do for our prospective clients, what you all do with communication and our podcast, how you build that up. So it's fantastic to see how much dedication and hard work you also put into your free time. And I couldn't be prouder to have our little bit of history-making news to be discussed here on the podcast. Yeah. Very well done.
Yeah, and Jacqueline, you have Swiss, French, and Italian roots. Do you have any connection to rugby at all? Did you ever follow it growing up? No.
Not really, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But I will now.
No. But as we were talking, getting ready for this, you had mentioned you really like skiing. We found out that you actually did your year abroad in Colorado, which is where I originally was from. That was really wonderful to speak with you about your hobbies. And so are you sad that the Swiss ski season is kind of coming to an end?
Yeah. And this year was not really the greatest one in terms of snow, right?
Yeah.
So
we didn't get as much this year.
Yeah.
Bummer. So with that small little news out of the way, I'd love to jump into our topic for today, which is venture capital. You obviously work with Privileged Ventures, which is a venture capitalist firm here in Switzerland. And as we dive into that topic, maybe I could ask you to, I guess, give our listeners a bit of an understanding of what venture capital is and maybe how it differs from private equity, because sometimes there's some confusion there when it comes to the investor side.
Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting question you're asking, because it is indeed true that many people do confuse and mix up private equity and venture capital. So I would start to say that private equity and venture capital are very similar because they are part of private capital market investment. So essentially both, they invest in companies that are not listed, that are not public. So in that respect are definitely the same. But then it is very different on the target of companies you invest when you do private equity or venture capital. So private equity, usually you invest in companies that are much more established. Usually they are already revenue generation. And as a private equity investor, you usually take majority of a company. You may come in when there is, for example, some distress situation or management is not going so well. So you acquire a majority of the company, you restructure, and then essentially you sell it. And the amount involved is very different. while venture capital essentially invests in companies that are startups. So they are at very beginning, they're very often not revenue generation. There is usually a high component of innovation and technologies that you have it, and you invest less amounts. And they are not public as well, and the scope is the same, is to have an exit at the end, but you usually acquire a minority ownership. So in that respect is also very different than the type of investors that do this job and the way they look at these companies. And the confusion often comes because someone that does private equity tend to think, oh, I do now venture capital. Because, in fact, is also investing in private companies, but the fact that one is really a new company that maybe we just started, the two of us, and it's still kind of investing in a vision of the founders. In the other one, you can have financial numbers and you crunch on it, so more similar to the public market in a way.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so you brought up now that you're mostly investing in startups and newer companies. So from my understanding, that would mean that probably the level of innovation is quite relevant, right? In like the industry that you invest in here in Switzerland, I understand that most of your investments are here in Switzerland. So how would you assess how Switzerland fares in terms of innovation compared to an international level? My understanding is that it continuously ranks quite high. I'm not sure if this is correct, and if it is, why that's the case, and maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So you are totally correct, Jamie. So in terms of innovation, for the 12 years in a row, Switzerland is ranked as the first and most innovative country in the world on the Global Innovation Index. So that's very good. And the reason can be seen in different aspects. So you have top research centers, top university. Here in Zurich we have ETH, in Lausanne EPFL, but you have also other research centers where essentially these innovation and technologies are brought. So we rank pretty high. But of course, what's different is the way this type of innovation is nurtured by investors. So that's something we can still do some work in this respect. So of course it also depends when you talk about innovation. For example, Switzerland is always very high when you look at the number of patents. So that's one of the criteria on this innovation index. So it's good to have a lot of patent filing. Of course, this also brings and is a reason because we have a lot of pharma companies and so on. But having patent per se doesn't necessarily mean having successful business or being able to, create companies that can scale. And maybe we can look at differences in that respect from Switzerland compared to other countries.
Okay. And what is it, do you think, about, to carry on with the idea of innovation in these startups, what do you think it is about Switzerland that ranks them so high? Do you think it's just because of the university when it comes to innovation, with ETH and in Lausanne as well? Does that innovation stem from kind of that younger population that's in, or the younger working force that's in the universities? Or do you see it as more of a broad, something that's kind of in the Swiss culture and the Swiss mindset?
Well, certainly from the university side, you have a lot of innovation that comes out. But it's also true that in Switzerland, we have a culture where a lot of innovation has happened in different fields over the years. So not necessarily for the young generation. So I think it's something that really is part of the Swiss culture.
So going on to that point about the different, landscapes of what Switzerland looks like versus other countries now, specifically talking about venture capitalism or capitalist investing, how does, I guess for me as an American, we as Americans are often very proud of the US and what we put out, and with startups, we have Silicon Valley for the tech startups and, tons of, startup scenes, or a lot of this willingness to take on risk. But how do the two, fields or two countries, how do they differ when it comes to venture capitalism, and what separates Switzerland from the US and kind of the market as well, the feeling?
Yeah. I think Switzerland has actually advanced quite a lot in the last few years. If you look back even 10 years ago, it was a desert in Switzerland in terms of venture capitalists. So, of course, if you look at the US, this is the place where you look at when you think about venture capital, because that's where the venture capitalist has started. And in Switzerland, we still lack, I believe, the entrepreneurial culture that certainly is part of the American culture, right? Because here you have a number of things that actually keep entrepreneurs a little bit a step back from really advancing. So some point could be, first of all, precision. So here when you have startups and they are very technical, they want to have a product that is perfect before it goes out to market. So of course that's good, it's part of our culture, so nothing bad with this. But if you want to wait so much to have your product so perfect, you might have an American startup that comes in, and before you have your product ready, that company already acquired the market. The other part is that here in Switzerland, entrepreneurs fear, and that's part of the culture again, to have a failure. So we don't have yet this type of culture. So we tend to avoid failure. We feel ashamed, so we don't like to say, oh, we failed. While in the US, it's okay, right? When you start a journey as an entrepreneur, especially if you are backed by venture capitalists, is part of the journey. I mean, we know that a high number of companies just don't make it. So I think that's another part, to understand that failure is not something to be ashamed of, but it's a learning journey. Doesn't have to go as far as in the US, where sometimes they say fail as quick as possible. I mean, you can still make it on the first try, I think, but still it's something that is part of the game. The other important aspect, which I think is different in terms of culture and the way entrepreneurs here are, is the ambitious. So in the US, you are in general ambitious. You have a bold vision, right? So you say, I'm going to make it, right? So it's going to be 100 million, no, actually a 500 million company, no, actually a 1 billion. Here, you just say, well, we are happy if we can make 10 million in 10 years time. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. It can be very good for a lifestyle company, but not for a company that is backed by venture capitalists. So I think that's as well is another difference. And then the one final point, which I think is important to mention, is the culture of investors. So investors here in Switzerland are much more conservative and risk averse. So of course, we don't have yet this mentality, and meaning this that we don't have enough investors investing in venture capital in Switzerland. Starting from the big institutions, so pension funds, like in the US, we know all pension funds, endowment, foundation, they do have a high exposure to private capital market, right? Up to 30% on private equity, venture capital, all the different type of investments you have. Here is essentially zero. So this, of course, doesn't bring enough money to the country to support the innovation that we actually have. And of course, pension funds are part of it, but then you have banks, you have asset managers, you have family offices, so of course with different degrees. So I think here also we need to have an evolving culture where we have on one side more investors that can back the innovation we have, because otherwise the consequence is that this company will be backed by, for example, US VC funds or other funds, and essentially what happened, they will say, you know what, now that we essentially backed you with the big amounts, flip the company and bring the company to the US and let's scale. So if we want to keep the innovation and the creation of job and the real economy here in Switzerland, we also need to provide more capital to the companies.
So this comparison now between Switzerland and the US makes me think about the certain industries. So when we talk about public companies, there's some industries where Switzerland is very well known. One is of course financial services. We talk about that all the time. It's also pharma, which you mentioned. So how is it for the venture capital world? Are there also like startups in specific industries that seem to excel in Switzerland, or are we successful in all the industries?
No, I think we're in Switzerland. We are definitely very strong, and we can bring a lot of value. Are the technologies again, right?
Okay.
The hard technologies. So we have a lot on medtech, deep tech, biotech. So everything that has a very high component of research and development that has been done, right? And then, of course, that's why we have so many patents, right, filing. Yeah. So in that respect, I think we are not behind the US at all. But still, right, you need to back those companies. Yeah. Of course, in the US, where they are much more advanced, and I think we have a lot to learn from the US, is on the marketing side, is how to sell and so on. And that's why when you have software companies in the US, besides they have a big market to address, but they usually scale much faster because they are more ambitious and they know how to sell. And here, marketing usually is not our strength.
Yes, I can attest to that. So what would you say, we have now spoken a lot about the more generic aspects of the venture capital world. For you and your company, what are the more specific things you look for when selecting startups? So if a startup comes to you, they want some money from you, what do you look out for and how do you assess whether or not they will be successful in the future?
Yeah. So we invest actually seed stage, meaning at the very beginning that the company is founded. So essentially you have maybe 2-3 founders started a company, they've been backed maybe by family and friends, maybe a few angel investors, and that's when we like to get in, so very early, and then to be able to follow the company for 1 or 2 equity round, meaning when they raise capital. What we look for, the most important thing, are teams, are people. Because given you invest very, very early, of course, the idea must be a good idea. You need to have a product or a service that you want to develop that makes sense. The best is when it's a must-have rather than a nice-to-have product. And then there must be a certain market size, right? Because you need to scale and you need to have a certain exit with a multiple. So you need to make, as a venture capital fund, a certain type of return. But given this that you assess, when you start to do the due diligence, we actually spend a lot of time talking to the founders, because in our experience, the companies in our portfolio that didn't make it, we did make so far 40 investments over 6 years, and we have 4 companies that didn't make it so far. So until now, very good actually, ratio on this. It was always because of people. So either the founders started to fight to each other, or they were not able to deliver, or they were not able to execute. That's also another important point, because you might have a founding team that is very good from a technical perspective, but they have no idea how to run a company, how to manage a company, how to hire people, how to go international, and so on and so forth. So that's where we spend really a lot of time to meet with them, to understand how they can work together, how they met each other, what is the ultimate reason why they do this. And we try to challenge them to see, are they going to be able to go to the up and downs that a startup journey it's going to take, right? Because you're going to have a lot of down and a few up, and the up you're going to have only at the very, very end. Yeah. So both for the companies and for us as investor is actually a marathon. So that's something that it's not easy to assess, is more a soft skill, a quality, and you tend to have more ability on these the more people you meet, right? Yeah. And then of course this, I would say, would compose 70% of the thing. So we need to be able to say, yeah, I can work with you. I can really see myself in the journey for the next 10 years with you on building a successful company. So that's also a question we need to ask ourselves, and the founders need to ask themselves. Do I want to have this investor in my ownership, in my cap table? Yeah. Then of course the rest is, as said, product market fit and market size, and who essentially can buy the company. That's the other important thing we try to ask, to assess what's the exit scenario. So which type of company, or maybe even what name of a company, can be a buyer for this specific startup. And of course it's a lot of assumption given we start very early.
Yeah. So if you say 70% is team and people, and if you do feel that something is not going well, how involved are you as an investor? So you said early on that with venture capital you take a minor share in the stock. Do you become part of the board? Are you part of the advisory board? How closely do you work with the founders or the managers of the company?
Yeah. So usually when we lead rounds, meaning that we are the company that syndicate the round, we usually take a board seat. Okay, so that's what we usually do. But even when we don't have a board seat, we tend to have a very close relationship with the companies because first of all, it's our interest and the interest of our investors to do all the efforts possible to make this a successful company.
Yeah.
But what we try to be is to be there when the founders really need us. So being over the weekend or at night, it doesn't really matter. And this for whatever thing they can need. So we always tell founders, please reach out before it's too late. Because maybe now it seems that it's just a minor problem, but maybe you don't know how to tackle this problem. So try to have a second opinion, a sparring partners.
Yeah.
And that's not easy for a founder because, of course, they see you as the investor, right? So they don't want to appear maybe weak or with, kind of, okay, am I doing this or not? But we try really to build this trust, this relationship, so that they know it's a safe place where they can come, even with topics that, you might not be so happy with. And that's also from the emotional point of view. Founders, for entrepreneurs, being an entrepreneur is usually a very lonely journey, right? It's difficult to be an entrepreneur. And we have seen founders getting burnout or close to it. So we try always to kind of test how they feel from an emotional perspective and try maybe to encourage, please disconnect, take 3 days, don't look at your emails and go on vacation, take care of your family because the mental health is very, very important in order to be able to deliver.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think it's interesting to hear, I guess, that side of the business of actually wanting to take care of your investment and not just through the financials, facts and figures, but looking at the people. And I think that's a really fascinating piece of venture capitalism or investing that's maybe not very well known. And that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And every VC fund has a different way maybe to approach. And that's another fascinating aspect because everyone can say, for me that's important, for me that's not. But personally, the reason why I went to VC seed stage and not, for example, private equity is exactly for this aspect because I really enjoy working with people.
Yeah. Jamie, do you have any other final thoughts or questions?
No, so the final question for me would be if someone's intrigued by the topic, where can they learn more and how can they educate themselves further on the topic? And then maybe, I'm not sure if you were covering that, but maybe also where can they learn more about you if they want to reach out?
So I think everyone can find me on LinkedIn, and we do have a LinkedIn page as well and a website with all the contact details on the website as well, including my personal email. And I would be happy to be in contact, and I think it's very easy to find me.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put your company info,
Absolutely.
your info all in the show notes. So
Perfect.
our listeners, if they're interested in getting to know Jacqueline a bit better or interested in venture capitalism or venture capitalist investing, you can find all that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts you maybe want to say to our listeners about venture capitalist investing?
I think it's just a very interesting and passionate topic, and I believe that anyone that has assets should diversify a part of it into venture capital because it can contribute to have an impact in the world because of the technologies that are developed, and so for this reason I think it just makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for being here. Jamie, thank you. I appreciate the time that you've taken to come
Thanks
with us during this day and this time, and we're looking forward to staying in contact with you and excited to put this podcast out and let the people learn more about venture capital investing in Switzerland.
Thank you very much to both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Swiss Money Secrets podcast. If you would like to learn more about WHVP and what we do, check us out on our website at whvp.ch. Or you can check us out on any of our social media handles on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram by simply searching WHVP. Have a great rest of your day.